In this video, I'll demonstrate how to work with operating system virtualization. These days, you can work with virtual machines either on premises, so with equipment that is owned by you or your organization that is completely under your control, or you can deploy virtual machine instances into the cloud on cloud provider equipment. Let's start with on premises. Here I've got VMware Workstation. Now, there are many other virtualization tools you might be using, like VirtualBox or Microsoft Hyper-V, and so on. However, notice here in VMware Workstation, if I were to click the Create a New Virtual Machine link, it starts a wizard where I'm asked questions about where the installer file or disk is for the operating system. Here, I'll just leave it on I will install the operating system later. Then I'm asked which flavor of the guest operating system it will be: Windows, Linux, Novell NetWare, Solaris Unix, and so on. And as I proceed, I get to give it things like a name, a storage location, and so on. Now, we can also deploy virtual machines in the cloud very quickly. And of course, we only get charged for what we're using while the virtual machine is running. Here, for example, I'm using Amazon Web Services in the public cloud, but I just as well could be using Rackspace or Microsoft Azure. Here, I'm going to go click on EC2, which is what is used for virtual machines launched into the Amazon Web Services cloud. Now, what I want to do in this console is click on Instances on the left. This will show me any virtual machine instances I've already deployed in the cloud. Now, if I don't have any, of course, I can click the Launch Instance button to do that. So essentially what I'm doing is building a virtual machine through a web-based interface. Here, I've got a gallery of essentially virtual machine templates for various Linux distributions. And as I go further and further down, I can see various Windows Server operating systems that I can use when deploying a virtual machine in the cloud. I can also click on the Marketplace link on the left and search up specific virtual machine templates, essentially, that might have applications pre-configured or virtual appliances like for network attached storage and so on. So in this case, what I'm going to do is go back to Quick Start, and I'll just choose Amazon Linux, and I'll just click Select. And just like building a virtual machine on premises, it's going to ask me a number of questions. In this case, it wants to know the sizing type. In other words, how many virtual CPUs or vCPUs, how much RAM, and so on. I'm just going to accept this and go to the next step, where I can determine which virtual network in the cloud I want this to be deployed into, and whether it should have a public IP address. I'm going to enable that option. So I'm just going to click the Review and Launch button in the bottom right. I'll click the Launch button. Now, in the cloud, what's interesting about this specific cloud provider is that I have to create, or in this case, choose an existing key pair that will be used to authenticate to that virtual machine. So I'm going to acknowledge that I've got the private key portion that will allow me to authenticate. So then I just click Launch Instance. And at this point, it's launching that virtual machine. In this case, it's using Amazon Linux in the cloud. So I can go ahead and click on the link for that and see how it's doing. So it's very quick and easy to launch a virtual machine into the cloud. It's equally as easy in the future to remove it or stop it. So having a virtual machine selected, I can go to the Actions button here, and under Instant State, I could stop it or terminate it, which means delete it. Now, you want to make sure that you stop any cloud services when you no longer need them, because depending on the provider, you'll still be charged. So you don't want to leave virtual machines running for months, because you're still going to be paying for that usage, even if you're not actually using them. Notice here at the top, I've got an option to connect to the selected virtual machine. So when I click Connect, in this case, because it's Linux, I can do it using a standalone SSH client like PuTTY, or I could use a Java SSH client in my web browser. Now, I don't have to do it this way. For example, I could simply use the free PuTTY tool to make a connection from my local station over the internet to that virtual machine in the cloud, which we're going to do. Now, before I do that, though, I need to take note of either the public DNS name down here or IP address of this host. I'm going to copy the public IP address. Here on my Windows station, I've downloaded and run the PuTTY tool, where I've put in the public IP address of my cloud virtual machine. I'm connecting over port 22 because it's a Linux host, so I want to SSH to it. And I've also gone down here under Connection SSH Auth on the left and enabled agent forwarding because it requires public key authentication. I've already loaded my private key to be able to do that. So now I would click Open, And of course, it asks me to log in. So in this particular case, I know the username that is required to authenticate, and I'm in. I am now logged in to my Linux cloud-based virtual machine. In this video, we learned about server virtualization.